Yeah, hello. Welcome to the module of stakeholder management. Understanding the stakeholders and classifying them based on their interest in the project and their power to influence the project is critical to project's success. So the first thing what we need to do is understand the definition of stakeholder. That means anybody who is affected positively or negatively by doing a project or by not doing a project or by delaying a project can be a stakeholder. So the first thing is identify the stakeholders and create a stakeholder register or a list. Once that is done, then we should associate a ranking for power of the stakeholders and for their ability to influence the project. So we call it as a power interest rating. The interest can be a positive interest or a negative interest. Because recently I was studying a case study for a stakeholder management for a airport project, which is the Brandenburg Airport project, which is a classical failure story. So if you Google for Brandenburg Airport or classical project failures of 2019-2020, this comes out. Here, one of the major issues or the root causes for failure was the sponsor of the project was always misguiding the rest of the stakeholders by saying that the project is all good. There is no problem with the project. So he was hiding the fact and there was no transparency into the status of the project. So ultimately what happened was it was almost 100% schedule overrun and another 100% cost overrun. The project was supposed to get over 4 years back and it is not yet completed. Another reason for this was some of the stakeholders were representatives from the adjacent airports, and they had a negative interest. They wanted this project to get delayed or they wanted this project to fail because if this new airport starts, then that is going to impact the business of their existing airports. So that is a classical example of negative interest. So there can be stakeholders with a high level of positive interest. At the same time, there could be stakeholders with a high level of negative interest towards the project. Both are equally important because if you don't manage them, they are going to affect the project either positively or negatively. So spending time in understanding the stakeholders and understanding their power to influence the project and the nature of the power, whether it is a positive power or negative power, and their interest in the project. So there can be high interest stakeholders and low interest stakeholders. Similarly, there could be high power stakeholders and low power stakeholders. So after understanding these things, we need to develop strategies to influence them so that the stakeholder engagement is ensured consistently from the start of the project till the completion of the project. If all the stakeholders are happy from start to finish, that means the project is happy. And this is the project manager's ability. And like every good thing in projects, this also need to be proactively planned. So spending time in understanding the stakeholders, their wants, their needs, their engagement levels, their power and the interest, that is a good investment to eliminate a lot of issues in the project as the project progresses. Now let us go back to the slides. I'll explain with that this topic. It's a very interesting topic, and with that, once you see the slides, things will be much clearer to you. Now this is the classical definition of a stakeholder. Who is a stakeholder? As I already said, a stakeholder can be anybody who is affected positively or negatively by doing a project, or by not doing a project, or by delaying a project, can be a stakeholder. Stakeholder can be individuals, it can be organizations, it can be group of people. So the classical example we had with about stakeholder management was the Tatas, when they wanted to start their nano car project. They were supposed to start it in West Bengal, in a place called Singanore, and they invested a lot of money there. And suddenly, the local farmers who lost their land because of this particular new manufacturing facility, they started agitating, they started demanding money, but the project managers refused to listen to them because they were low power, high interest stakeholders. Suddenly, these farmers teamed up with the local politicians, and suddenly they became high power, high interest stakeholders. And because of that, they had to shift their factory from Singur to Gujarat, and the loss was around 700 crores, whereas the demand by these farmers were approximately 60 to 70 crores. So with a fraction of the loss, they could have met the needs of the stakeholders. But unfortunately, the project manager failed in managing the stakeholder needs, and because of that, the Tatas incurred a loss of 700 crores. Now, the first thing in stakeholder management is stakeholder identification, and for that we use expert judgment. So if we are experts, we can identify the stakeholders. Sometimes we use questionnaires and surveys, and sometimes we use sometimes we use brainstorming and stakeholder analysis, and sometimes document analysis will help us to understand the stakeholders, and the power interest grid, that is in the next subsequent slide. Now, this is an example of stakeholders for an airport project. We have the passengers, airlines, local communities, suppliers, employees, government agencies, trade unions, investors, airport community, media, tenants, general public, regulatory bodies. This list can be incomplete, but then the sample list of stakeholders. So we were talking about identifying or preparing a stakeholder register first. So we may do brainstorming, we may scan through the documents, we may use expert judgment. So through all these things, first we identify the stakeholders and then develop a stakeholder register. Then once we identify the stakeholders, once the stakeholder register is ready, the next exercise is to classify them into these 4 segments. On the x-axis is the interest of the stakeholder in the project, and on the y-axis is the power of the stakeholder to influence the project. So we have a set of high power, high interest stakeholders here in this particular segment. So they must be managed very closely. That means at least they should get a weekly update of the project. Whether they ask for it or not, as a project manager, you should send it. And then we have another class of stakeholders who have a lot of power. At the same time, they don't show a lot of interest in this particular project. It could be the CEO of maybe the owner organization. So they may have a lot of interest in the project, but at the same time, this is just one of their projects, so they may not show a lot of interest. But still, you cannot ignore them. You should ensure that they are getting at least a monthly update of the project. They may not ask for it, but still proactively you should go and update the status of the project at least once in a month. Then we have low power, high interest stakeholders. So this segment could be the typical end users, maybe like the passengers of the airport, and the taxi operators of the airport. So these are low power. At the same time, they have a very high interest level in the project. So at least a quarterly update should go to this particular segment. Then we have low power, low interest stakeholders. So we can, by and large, we can ignore them for the time being. Now, another important aspect is as the project passes through this initiation, planning, execution, monitoring and controlling, and closing, as the project passes through different phases, sometimes the stakeholders will change and their power equations also will change. So during the requirement phase, maybe the business analyst are key stakeholders. They have a lot of power and a lot of influence. And during the design phase, maybe the architects are very powerful. And maybe during the coding time, maybe or the construction time, it is the engineering team which is very powerful. So as the project progresses through different stages, the stakeholder dynamics can change. So this is a continuous activity. Stakeholder identification, prioritization, and ensuring that proper engagement is there throughout the project by the key stakeholders. So this is a continuous process from the start of the project till the end of the project, and we call it as stakeholder management. So these days, this is becoming more and more critical as the projects becomes more and more complex, and most of the projects are multinational in nature, and people are working remotely. So different cultures come to action through virtual teams. So this is of great emphasis in the present day environment. Stakeholder management is very critical for successful project management. Thank you. And one more thing, whatever you understood from this video, please post it as a comment, or if you have any additional questions about stakeholder management, please post it as a comment after this video, so that at least I know that you have gone through this video and understood the key aspects of it. So if you are looking for a 35 contact hours certificate, please post your understanding of stakeholder management or some scenarios of good stakeholder management or bad stakeholder management that happened in your projects. Please post it as a comment so that I know that you have understood it, you watched this video and understood the topic. Thank you very much.